Okay, it's Sunday, which means against my better judgment, it's time to go to Reddit and see what we can find in this hive of scum and villainy. So I've been to the Overwatch University subreddit ahead of time and just scraped all the questions off the first couple pages, and we're going to answer them now while some footage of Dragon Ball FighterZ plays in the background, because it is a much better game than Overwatch that I enjoy immensely. And if you're curious which side I'm on, just look for whichever side started with Android 21. So the first question is, what makes Ana so good? So Ana's just basically kind of got it all going for her as far as a support goes, because she can heal anybody within her line of sight from very far away. She can contribute her own damage as well. She has got good sustain versus flankers. She's got good self-peel because she can do damage herself. She's got the sleep dart and she's got the bio grenade. And the bio grenade itself is a large portion of why Ana is so good, because it is one of the best utility items and damage items in the entire game. Because the anti-heal off the bio grenade is ridiculously strong, and if used well, can win a fight entirely by itself, which is not much something you can say of many basic abilities in this game. And then there's Nano Boost as well, which synergizes well with most heroes, and is kind of the only reason some heroes are any good at all, if we're being brutally honest, Genji. As well as being a good ability for just saving people as well, if your tank did something terribly ridiculous. So she's kind of just got it all going for her. She doesn't have much in the way of downsides other than she's fairly vulnerable to full dive, but you don't see a whole lot of that right now, especially since currently there's a lot of double shield going around, so the only thing that can happen to Ana that's unfortunate in that situation is that if there's a shield in the way, she's kind of fucked, right? She can't go through a shield. So that can be unfortunate for Ana. But other than that, like, she's got it all going for her, dude. She's got it all. Damage, healing, utility, lots of utility, and a good ultimate. So she's got it all. The only thing she doesn't have going for her that some other supports have over her is that she doesn't have, like, a strong, like, team defense ability, right? Like, she doesn't have anything like Transcendent, Sound Barrier, Immortality Field. She doesn't have anything like that that's going to bail the team out of a terrible situation. But she is much better at facilitating her teammates doing good work than other supports are, because Ana has tremendous ability to set up her own teammates with all of her abilities, right? Sleep Dart can set allies up, Bio Grenade easily sets allies up, and Nano Boost, we need say no more about its ability to set allies up. So, she hasn't got as much defensively as some other supports have, but offensively, she's out of control. So that's what makes Ana good. Basically everything about her. She's got a lot of good shit going on. So, next up is, how do I get tanks to press W? And I like to look at the threads for some of these questions if it's not something horribly generic, right? Like, there are some where I don't need to click on the thread to see what people are going to be saying about it. I was curious as to what people might be saying about this one, and the top comment just reminded me of why Reddit is like one of the worst websites in existence. It's just supremely unhelpful. So I look in, and this was a relatively active thread. It had a fair few comments in it, and the top comment, which had like 30 votes or something like that, was less than 20 words. It was just, usually I get on voice chat and say, press W, let's go in. And that was the top rated comment by far, by like 20 whole points. And the person who posted the thread just went, yeah, I do that, and then colon backslash, right? Which is about how I felt about it. So going through this thread, I had to get down to like the 10th comment on it before anybody actually started contributing useful advice, right? It took a long time to find anything decently helpful in there. Reddit's fucking awful, dude. You go looking for advice, and you just get people saying the same old fucking pointless trash jokes all the time. Just awful. Anytime there's a quest, this is really good. Anytime there's something on there that's like, who should I watch, essentially? the top comment is always just Jane, maybe even just that as the comment, and then someone immediately after that just goes, Jane kinda stopped, dude, and the other guy's like, oh fuck, shit, they found me out, I wasn't really keeping up with anything. Anyway, getting off track, so how do I get tanks to press W? So this person in general was just bemoaning the tanks are cowards that sit in the choke point all day, and Reddit was mostly agreeing with that without really contributing much of advice. So as someone who has played a lot of tank, right? So here's the issue from the perspective of the tank player that is set at the choke point. It is that if the enemy team is applying a dramatic amount of pressure to me, particularly if I'm somebody who is dependent on a barrier, so Reinhardt, Orisa, Sigma. If I'm very dependent on my barrier, and the enemy team is applying a lot of pressure to me, i.e. fucking my barrier up, and my team is not putting any pressure on their barrier at all, it makes it very difficult for me to actually walk through the door. Because if my barrier gets broken, theirs doesn't, I'm already kind of fucked. Secondarily, if I go through the door, and my teammates don't follow me through the door, or my healer, my Moira, gets distracted shooting somebody, I'm going to die, because a lot of damage happens very quickly in this game. So, the most common reason that your teammates are not, your tank is not pressing W is he is feeling pressured by the enemy team's DPS, and he is not feeling like any pressure is being exerted on the enemy team's tanks. So that's the most common problem. Or you just don't trust your teammates, because it's possible that pressure is being applied to them, and this happens quite frequently. It's possible that pressure is being applied, but the second you go through the door, your teammates just sit at the choke point playing peekaboo around the corner and don't follow you up, and you die. So it's mostly the reason that tanks often don't press W and just sit in the choke point is they don't trust their teammates to actually do their jobs, which is difficult to fix as an issue, isn't it? So it's going to be very difficult for you to get your tanks to press W if they feel like they can't. Now it is indeed wholly possible that they're just massive bitch pussies. That's entirely possible. But if they're massive bitch pussies on like a personal level, there's nothing you can do to fix that problem, really, except like give them the most dramatically good engage imaginable, where you just pick off multiple people, basically. That's the only way you're gonna make the bitch player play like less of a bitch, really. So, a more generally useful level. So you can, if you're playing DPS, basically, if you're playing the barrier game with the other team, then you changing to someone who can apply more pressure to the enemy team's barrier is going to make your tank feel better about trying to walk through the door, because they'll feel like they aren't just losing the barrier war the second they walk around the corner, which is a big problem. If you're playing a support, then you can try and pick people that can more easily facilitate your tank doing something aggressive. So Ana nano boosting your tank is going to usually make that person go very ham, often too ham, if we're being perfectly honest. If we're playing Lucio, we can be speed boosting them through the door. We can use sound barrier, which will generally prompt forward movement from players. Playing Zenyatta, we can put Discord on people, make it easier to get picks on them, you know. If we're playing Batista, then we can, or yeah, no, just Batista really, then throwing like the immortality field in a fairly aggressive position might prompt them to move forward as well, stuff like that. You're basically trying to exert, like, either make the tank player feel safer, or just exert more pressure on the enemy team, which is generally going to be easier to do from an attack from the DPS perspective. Changing to someone like Junkrat, Hanzo is going to make it easier to get picks and win the barrier war, which will make your tank feel more aggressive. If you're the other tank, just pick a dive tank. They'll follow you then, hopefully, and if they don't, well, shit, dude. I don't know what to tell you at that point. Pick another main tank, like pick another tank that can push W, and just push W for them, pretty much. But you may soon discover that they had a reason for not pushing W in that situation, which might be more difficult to fix. It might behoove you to pick, like Zarya, who's got a very big team fight ultimate that can just punish the enemy team for being clustered together, and is one of the most definite, like, go the fuck in now pussy moments you can give your teammates, is to drop the Graviton on the enemy team. But those are about your big options, really, because it's typically a trust issue, or the tank is just feeling extremely pressured and the enemy team is not feeling pressured. For example, like, your tank is almost never going to be in a position where they feel like they can push W if your DPS are like Genji Sombra, because that's a combo of DPS that is going to be exerting very, very minimal pressure to their front line most of the time. So your tank is going to constantly feel like he is on the back foot, so it's going to be extremely unlikely he'll want to push W in that situation. So changing to more DPS that can facilitate the tank walking forward, like people that are good at breaking barriers, McCree, who is just really good, you know, Mei, you know, people like this, they're better at working with their front line than someone like Genji, right? If you're sitting there playing like Genji, Tracer, Sombra, and you're wondering why your tank is never trying to walk through the choke point, there's a strong possibility that you are the reason that he's not pushing W, especially if the other DPS is playing a similar hero, because they aren't winning the fight at the front line at that point, right? So they need you, if you're going to be playing those DPS, to be applying a lot of pressure to the backline and getting a lot of picks, because they are not winning the fight at the front line, so you need to be attracting massive amounts of aggro. So that's about what I got for you on that one. The answer is probably you. It's probably you. I'm sorry to tell you. So next up is which support to pick against Genji, specifically playing against Genji, of course. And I don't know, Elevator's music is playing on my head right there. Bridget's going to be basically the best one you can pick, because she's hardest to get killed by Genji, basically. But depending on if you're main or off healer, it might not be possible for you to feasibly pick her. So, Ana's a good one, just because she's got good self-peel in and of herself. Bio Grenade, if you can hit yourself and Genji with the Bio Grenade, the Genji's gonna leave. The Genji's gonna leave at that point. You can always trank him, you can just try and fight him off, you know, stuff like that. Lucio is going to be very reliably not killed by Genji, very hard to die to Genji as Lucio. And Batista is also fine for similar reasons as Ana can do your own DPS. You've got an ability that means you don't die, good stuff. And you can just try and fight the guy off. But the real play, whenever you're being harassed by as a support by the flankers, is typically to play closer to the other healer, who will most often help you. Like, playing close to your team is sometimes not feasible, depending on what's going on in the game, but you can almost always be playing close to your other healer, unless they're playing someone like Lucio and they're trying to make their highlight reel. Then, you know, you can't stand next to that guy. But most other supports you'll be able to stand next to, and they are fairly likely to help you if somebody like Genji is coming at you, and it's way easier to survive the situation if you've just got someone to help you, because it's really hard to win a 2v1 as the one person. So, you know, Ana's, if you can do it, if you can feasibly switch to an off healer, Bridget's going to be your best bet. And if you're a main healer, then your best bet's going to be Ana, because she's got the most self-sustain. You can try and pick Mercy and just avoid the situation, because if you're playing Mercy, you can just go to your allies, as long as they're in convenient locations for you. And you can hopefully just avoid the Genji situation, which would be nice to do, but not always possible depending on the team as well. But those are pretty much your options versus Genji. Relatively simple question. So next up is how to work with a bad team. And someone in the comments actually had a pretty good one about this, because the person was like, I get the crux of the thread was like, people say just carry the game, but like, how do you fucking do that as a support? I don't understand. And some guy in the comments was like, the just carry thing is complete nonsense, by the way, because carrying in Overwatch usually means facilitating your teammates actually doing something good. You're not ever going to be in a situation where you just 1v6 the enemy team, which is what most people are implying when they say just carry the game. And he's right, it is just nonsense, really. It's very hard to just 1v6 the enemy team unless you are multiple skill brackets above where you currently are. If you're going to try and hard carry the game, and you're in, like, Plat, you need to be, like, a Masters player to have a feasible chance, right? Like, you gotta be way higher. So it's mostly about, like, working with what you're given in a lot of situations, right? Especially if you're in, like, lower SRs, which is where you're gonna encounter the bad teams people are talking about, right? You've gotta work with what you've got. So, you're playing with a guy that's picking Bastion. Well, you've got two options, really, and the first one is just do whatever you were going to do already anyway, and, you know, the Bastion player will mostly end up just feeding his little heart out. Or you can play around the Bastion and hope that if you pick a bunch of people that can facilitate Bastion, he'll actually get some work done, right? If you're playing with, like, this is a really common one, is I'm playing with a Hammond that's just hard feeding the entire time, accomplishing nothing. One of the best things you can do in that situation is just go full dive and follow the Hammond and try to capitalize on what he's creating, right? Literally just follow the Hammond with the full dive. And hopefully keep him alive in that situation. Bare minimum, hopefully capitalize on the advantage he is creating, which is going to be distracting the enemy team, if nothing else. If you've got, like, a guy who's playing Torbjorn on attack, then the best thing you might be able to do is pick, like, a bunker comp and just play around that guy and hope that he actually applies some pressure to the enemy team. It's about playing with whatever you've been given at the time and just playing to whatever your strength is, really. Like, someone on my team has picked Genji. He's not very good, but if I pick Ana, I can make a not very good Genji a good Genji by just nano-boosting him when he's using Dragon Blade. And he still might... Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh, get this out of here. And he might still fuck it up, but he's dramatically less likely to fuck it up now, right? So, the best thing you can do when you're playing with a bad team is try and identify what the main issue is exactly, and see if you can do something to minimize that effect. The Bastion's just feeding constantly, not accomplishing anything. Well, I can change to a more bunker-style hero and hopefully just, like, bodyguard him, basically, and hopefully he'll get some work done. I've got a dive tank that's feeding. Well, we can change to divers to try and capitalize on what he is doing, and we can at least, like, follow up, if nothing else. Stuff like that. Similarly, you can just try and identify what your win condition is in this situation, which might be, you know, if it's Bastion, if you got a Bastion on your team, your win condition is likely to be Bastion. So picking somebody that can set that person up more might work out better in the end. If your win condition, if you like this, one of your win conditions is Genji, right? Picking Ana can be facilitating Nano Blade, which is generally a pretty good win condition. Stuff like that. What are some, like, less obvious examples? You might be playing, like, DPS, and you've got two off-tanks as your tanks, right? But you see that one of your tanks is playing Zarya, so it might behoove you, if you're playing, like, a DPS, to pick somebody that can capitalize on Black Hole very strongly, right? So, like, Junkrat, Mei, Reaper even, you know, people like that who can capitalize on a Black Hole. If you're playing a support, you can pick Ana, because if you throw Bio Grenade into the Graviton, then the people in that Graviton are in all likelihood going to die, so you can try and key off of that win condition instead. So those are the main sort of, like, 2 points of articulation you have, where you can look at what is going wrong on your team, and think if you can change to something that might make that shore up that weakness a little bit more, i.e. picking the barrier to put it in front of the bastion. Or you can try looking at what your chances you do have of winning, like what heroes what are my win conditions with this team? Is it like Graviton, Dragon Blade, you know, anything like that, and then trying to just like facilitate that even more than you were already, right? Those are like your two main things. It's about working with what you're given more than anything else, right? That's the thing with like trying to climb in like most games really, is that you're put into a situation, so you have to identify the situation, what strengths do you have here, what weaknesses do you have, and then you're trying to find ways, and you're looking at the enemy team and trying to think the same thing as well, like what have they got going for them, what do I need to play around, and then you're trying to pinpoint these areas, and then you're trying to capitalize on them as much as you can. That's generally what you're doing, because every game is going to be slightly different. You're always going to be given different teammates who've got different skill. They're going to pick different things. You're going to be on a different map. You're going to be playing against a different team, right? In that way, it's not too different to like playing like a card game if you really think about it, where like every game you play, you're going to draw different cards, and your opponent's going to draw different cards, right? Same thing, it's just the cards in this context are your teammates, the enemy team, and the map you're on. So, you've got to look at what you're given, and you've got to figure out, well, what can I do in here? Because you're the only thing in that game that you can control, unless you're playing in, like, a group setting. So you've got to look at the situation and think, what can I do here to either shore up the weakness or accentuate the strength of the situation? So, that's the best advice I can give you about playing with a bad team, really. And more often than not, it's going to result in, especially if you're in lower SR, it's going to result in you doing some really stupid shit, right? Like, you're going to have to go and stand in some ridiculous places, because if your teammates are standing in a stupid spot, the best thing you can do is go and stand in that stupid spot with them. Because the alternative is let them go and stand in the stupid spot by themselves. You're in the correct place, right? A really easy example. We're on, like, Dorado's first checkpoint, defending. Our teammates decide they're going to go stand in the street, right at the first corner, looking into the enemy team's spawn door, right? Well, if I'm playing, like, Ana, that's a bad example. If I'm playing, like, Soldier, right, I can stand back on the high ground next to the archway as I would normally, and just wait for them to come around the corner and do my job, right? The problem is, my teammates were doing the stupid thing, 5v6, because I'm doing that. It doesn't matter if I'm in the correct spot, because if my teammates all die because they were in the wrong spot, I am now in the correct spot by myself, so I'm not accomplishing anything anymore, am I? So the best thing I can do in that situation is go and stand with my team, basically, because at least then they're doing something stupid 6v6 instead of 5v6, right? And if I'm in the same right spot, but all my teammates die, doesn't matter. I can't do my thing 1v6, can I? So, you know, shit like that's gonna happen to you a lot, and it's gonna really suck. But that's the unfortunate thing about playing a team-based game, is your teammates are not always going to do what they should be doing. So you have to play with that as best you can, given the situation. And sometimes it's gonna be really unfortunate. Almost looked like I knew what I was doing right there. That was absolutely incredible. So there you go. I was talking about the game I was watching, by the way, not with me saying that. I never look like I know what I'm doing when I'm talking about shit. So that's what I got for you on that one. Next up is, how do you play without shield tanks? And basically you use a lot more cover, right? If you're playing like a dive team, then it doesn't really matter that you don't have a shield, right? Because the entire goal is just to jump on the enemy team, so you're not really worried about sitting and playing around barriers that much. But if you're playing like Ana, Soldier, what have you, and you don't have any shields, the best thing you can do is just use hard cover a lot more. Go and stand next to those walls, dude. Those walls are a lot like a shield that have infinite hit points. So you can always stand behind them. If you don't have any shields, like, it kind of depends on what your teammates are playing if you don't have a shield, right? Because if you don't have any shields, hold on 1 second. if you don't have any shields because your tanks are playing dive tanks, then it doesn't necessarily matter that you don't have any shields, even if you are playing a more static hero. Because the idea is that you're going to get a decent enough engage, right? Because if you're having got any shields because your teammates are playing, like, Hammond Diva, right? Then it doesn't necessarily matter that you don't have any shields, because the idea is going to be that the Hammond pushes the enemy team dramatically out of position, right? So you get a good enough engage that the enemy team don't even get to use the barriers that they have, right? So you just get to pick a nice fight with them regardless. In that kind of situation, it'll often end up not mattering. Again, you're just using cover. If you don't have any shields, but your tanks are playing like Roadhog Diva or like Roadhog Zarya, then life's going to be really hard for you, pretty much. Like, nothing's really changed from what I just said previously. We're still just going to have to use a lot more hard cover. The problem is getting through the doorway is going to be extremely difficult for us in most situations. If you don't have any shield tanks and you're playing, you can change to more independent heroes as well. Because if you don't have any shields, there's ways you can compensate for that as a player, because you can pick characters that are less dependent on having shields. You can pick characters that are flankers. They don't care if they're stood behind a shield, right? You can pick Farah. She doesn't care if she's stood behind a shield. She's not really worried about that. You can pick characters who are just more durable, right? Like, you pick Mei, she's not necessarily overly concerned about not having a barrier because she's like a half tank herself. So you can do things like that to make up for the lack of barriers. But you can do that kind of thing to make up for lack of healing as well, where like if your healers have picked like Lucio Zen as a really dramatically low amount of healing, so you can compensate for that by picking characters that have self-heal, right? Like you can pick Soldier because he's got Biotic Field, you can pick Roadhog as the off-tank because he's got a self-heal, you can pick Mei because she's got a self-heal and durable, Reaper's got lifesteal, flankers are generally not too concerned because they can just go and find health kits easier. So you can do the same thing with like healers as well, and so if you don't have any shields, like you can pick heroes that compensate for that. Someone like Soldier also compensates for not having shields because he's got self-heal as well. Being able to capitalize on high ground is also good if you don't have shields, because the high ground itself is like having a shield. So you can pick heroes that are good on high ground and try to control those spaces as well. These are pretty much your options. Just use hard cover, try and take advantage of high ground if you can, and if none of that's working, pick heroes that are less dependent on having shields to compensate for the lack thereof. And you can do that, like, for all the other roles, because you can do what we just said for healing as well. If you feel like your team's not doing enough damage, you can compensate for that as, like, a tank by picking, tanks that do a lot more damage, people like, who are a little bit more DPS-like Sigma ends up doing a fair amount of damage, Roadhog does a lot of damage, Orisa can do damage, Diva can do damage. You can pick tank heroes that do more damage. Supports, you can pick like Zenyatta, who does damage, right? You can pick people like, Lucio, who does more damage. Anna and Batista can add in their own damage, so can Moira, right? You can do these kinds of things rather than just, like, staying on, like, Mercy if you feel like you have no damage. So you can do things like that to compensate for your tanks as well. But those are pretty much your options in those situations. And, hey, if you're playing a dive comp, it doesn't even matter. Just go ham, dude. So, next up is, how do I determine what primary healer I should play? So, similarly to what we were talking about with our, what do I do with when I'm playing with bad team situation, right? You can, approach it from two angles, where you look at your, strengths and you look at your weaknesses. If you're playing a team that's got your DPSR, Widow, Hanzo, Widow, Soldier, right? Then you might be inclined to pick Mercy, because those DPS benefit a lot from being damage boosted, so picking Mercy is better in that kind of situation. But if your DPS are playing like Tracer, Genji, then Mercy has very little, she doesn't accomplish a whole lot with her damage boost in that situation. So you'd be better off in that situation picking Ana, because you look and you go, oh, Tracer, Genji? Well, I can nano boost Genji, and that makes my Genji dramatically better, so that's when you consider, like, picking Ana. My team are picking bunker comps. Well, I can pick Batista because he obviously works really well with bunker comps and facilitate that. I can, or you can be in the game and be thinking, I'm being pressured a lot from the enemy team, and my teammates are not super inclined to help me. So in that situation, you might consider changing to Moira because she is the most independent healer. She doesn't need her teammates to help her stay alive in most situations, right? So you might think about something like that. These are the kinds of things to consider. You might also decide to pick someone not necessarily based on your own team, but more to counter the enemy team. Because and I guess the example I'm about to use is kind of both. So suppose that we've got like a Zarya on our team, right? And suppose our team is Sigma, Zarya, Tracer, Doomfist, Ana, Zenyatta, right? And the enemy team, the only thing we're concerned about over there is we've got the Graviton that we're going to be hopefully capitalizing on. And we look at the enemy team and we see they've got a Zenyatta. So in that situation, we might go, well, we've got Graviton, they've got Zenyatta. Zenyatta's going to counter the Graviton in a lot of situations, so that might press me more into playing Ana, even though Ana doesn't really have huge, like, nano boost synergy with that team. She has, like, close to none, in fact. That's okay, because the reason I'm picking Ana in this situation is to throw the bio grenade into the Graviton and counter Transcendence. So in that way, I'm accentuating our strength and countering the enemy team, because that's their defense against Graviton. So you might think about something like that as well, which is kind of playing to your strengths and countering the enemy team at the same time. Those are the kinds of things you want to consider. The main thing that, like, you want to look at right at the start of the game is just going to be, like, your teammates, because you can't base your knowledge off the enemy team until you've seen what they're doing. So all you can really do at the start is go, well, I've got Widow Hanzo, so I'm incentivized to play Mercy. We're playing a bunker, so I'm incentivized to play Batista. Maybe Moira, Zenyatta to kind of keep people alive in there as well. I've got a Genji on my team, so I'm more inclined to play Ana now because I have a really good nano boost target, right? Stuff like that. Maybe you think, like, we're going, like, Rhine, Zarya, Reaper, Mei. I might pick Moira in that situation just because we are going to be doing a lot of time just, like, running into the enemy team, brawling it out, right? Especially if, like, the other healer is playing Lucio. A lot of that time is going to be spent just running into the enemy team, brawling it out. In which case, Moira bringing a dramatic amount of AoE healing will be good utility for the team because it facilitates our aggressive, brawling teammates more if I can just, like, pump out big healing numbers, right? Those are the kinds of things you want to consider. And then once the game actually starts, you can look at the enemy team and then make decisions like, well, I'll change to Ana so I can counter their Transcendence in the Graviton, right? Or I'm not getting help from my teammates, so I'll change to Moira so I don't need help from my teammates to stay alive, right? You can make decisions like that afterwards. But those are the kinds of things to consider. I think it is more important to play to your team's strengths than necessarily cover weaknesses. This is just my personal opinion on the matter. Is I would rather pick somebody that is making my team stronger rather than covering a weakness that my team has, right? Because I'd rather we're just never in a situation where the weakness begins to matter, personally. So I tend to worry more about things like who works with my team as opposed to, like, countering the enemy team. But sometimes countering the enemy team ends up being more important. It's all about, like, what you think in your specific game, right? And how your style changes as well, because I'm typically more aggressive as a player, so I like to go pretty ham in a lot of situations, so accentuating strengths is usually better for me. So there you go. That's pretty much what I've got for you. Those are the things that you want to consider. And next up, and this is actually the last question for this week, is, am I overreacting, or is Genji the worst character in the game right now? And I think we're not far off at this point, actually. So Genji's actually been, like, kind of bad for a while, for the reason that, I mean, the meta has not really favored him for a while. 1 second. I'm a thirsty boy. The meta has not really favored him for a while. because there's been a lot of, like, very durable heroes that have been around for a while, and Genji hates playing against people like that, right? Genji still has, like, room to outplay most of his counters. He has a very high skill ceiling for the most part, so it's still possible for Genji players to, like, play around his weaknesses and still, like, do work, right? And people just like Genji, so they've always picked him regardless. But he's been, like, not great for a while, just meta-wise. And a lot of heroes got, like, buffed to try and do something about goats, right? Like, Doomfist got stronger, Sombra got stronger, Reaper got stronger, Mei got stronger. And Goats is gone now, but the buffs those people got stayed behind. So, in a lot of situations, it's kind of like, what's the incentive to pick Genji over other heroes at this point, right? Because I can pick Genji and, like, be really good at picking one person and have this, like, great ultimate, right? Or, I could pick Doomfist and just go in there and slam jam on, like, multiple people simultaneously, be extremely durable, therefore have a wider margin for error, and in a lot of situations be able to one-shot somebody, right? Why would I pick Genji over this guy? This guy does similar stuff to Genji, but he does it safer, and in a lot of situations, more efficiently. So what's the incentive to pick Genji, right? That's kind of the issue, is there's, like, other heroes at this point that fill the niche Genji does, but they do it better. If I'm looking for a flanker that's, like, really good at pressuring the backline and has a strong ultimate, why don't I just pick Sombra? And then I have the benefit of not getting fucked by shields as much, right? Because I can just hack people behind the shields and build up my amp. And then when I build up the amp, I get rid of their shields, dude! Problem solved. So it's kind of like there are a lot of people that are now filling Genji's niche, and they do it better in a lot of circumstances. So there's that problem. And currently now, right, we just got the ult charge nerf, and Genji was already basically just an ult bot. So he's gonna get hit by the ult charge nerf harder than most heroes, because that's what Genji revolves around, is Dragon Blade, right? Like, if Genji didn't have Dragon Blade, he'd be completely worthless, dude. Like, if Genji had... Because Dragon Blade is like a 9 out of 10 ultimate, right? Like, it's a really good ultimate. And then if you nano boost the Genji, it goes up to like 11 out of 10 ultimate, right? So, like, that hard carries Genji as a hero. If Genji had an ultimate that was more like Barrage, which is like a 5 out of 5 ultimate, right? If Genji had an ultimate like that, he would be phenomenally underpowered. He would be close to completely worthless, right? Dragon Blade carries that dude so hard. Without it, he's got nothing other than being a worse flanker than basically all of the other flankers. So, you know, the meta kind of hasn't favored him for a while, generally getting more durable, and more people got buffed. They're now, like, crowding in on his niche, and he got hit by the ult charge nerf harder than most heroes, because he revolves around it entirely as a hero, right? And you can say this, you can argue a similar thing about somebody like Sombra, but Sombra's got more utility to fill that out, right? Like, just hacking someone is really fucking inconvenient. Genji doesn't have that kind of utility attached to him. So even someone that still revolves around their ultimate, Sombra, she's got the utility of hack, which is still strong in and of itself. Genji brings close to no utility to his teammates. He is just bringing an extremely strong ultimate and decent pick potential. So, you know, I don't know if he's the worst necessarily. Like, I think you can make a case for, like, Soldier being worse than him. But he's definitely pretty far down the list at this point. Like, he is very close to the worst hero at this point. Even like Symmetra has dramatic. Like, at this point, Symmetra is like several like tier brackets ahead of Genji, right? Like, who would have guessed that we'd ever end up in a dystopian world where Symmetra is a, like, A-tier hero, and Genji is, like, a C-tier hero, right? So that feels so crazy to think about from, like, where the game started. So, yeah, if he's not the worst, he's pretty fucking close, dude. Like, he's struggling. I don't really have anything productive to, like, offer as a suggestion either, except maybe revert the ult charge nerf for Genji. Like, just buff his ult charge. Or outside of just, like, maybe give him, like, a rework, dude, because, like, it's not been apparent, and, like, right now as well, it's harder for Genji to charge his, shield because of the meta as well, which is currently double shields as well, so that kind of, like, doubles down on another issue we already listed, so, like, Genji, it's kind of been hidden for a while that Genji, has been pretty bad, especially compared to where he used to be. It's been hidden because Nanoblade has always remained very, very strong. So it still feels like Genji is contributing something in most situations, because you see him getting these big plays of the game. You see him in the kill feed frequently, particularly when he has his ultimate ready. So things like that have kind of boosted him up a little bit more than he's, like, really deserved. So I think most people have, like, not, and myself included, it's taken me a while to, like, realize how much Genji's been struggling as well. But, like, it's really, like, disguised it. And people just like picking Genji as well. Like, Genji's just a popular hero, so he's always seen play. But, like, he's definitely gonna need something, and I feel like he's got kind of an intrinsic issue kit-wise, where just, like, his ultimate is so strong. And as a result of that, he as a hero needs to be weaker to compensate for this massive strength, right? Because if you've got a 10 out of 10 ultimate, and you're also a 10 out of 10 hero, you're the most overpowered hero in the game, by far, right? So if he's gonna have a really strong ultimate, he needs to be weaker as a character. But if we're taking this line where we're going to skew a little bit away from ultimates, which is what the ult charge nerf kind of indicates, is that the goal of that has to be to try and move the game away from ultimates a little bit, right? If we're going to lean away from ultimates, then Genji as a hero needs to be stronger to compensate for that, because right now he revolves so strongly around his ultimate. So maybe nerf his ultimate and buff him as a hero in response, because then he's less dependent on that. And, you know, you can, I don't have any productive examples to offer, and that's just the kind of general line I'm thinking we could go down. And if we don't want to do that, then if we want to keep to the identity of Genji as a hero that has a very strong ultimate, which, to be fair, like, it's kind of hard to move away from at this point, right? Like, Dragon Blade is, very definitively connected to Genji at this point, so changing that to be weaker runs the risk of alienating a fairly large chunk of the player base, so maybe we're not inclined to do that. So in that case, we need to make it so that Genji can build his ultimate reliably, thereby reverting the nerf. Or make the ultimate even stronger to compensate for the fact it's taking longer to get to, right? Because those are kind of like the two main ways. We either, like, stick to him being strong for his ultimate because of his ultimate, or we take a direction away from the ultimate, in which case Genji's going to need some changes to make him just a better hero overall. So it's a fairly complicated issue, and I don't think there's an objectively better solution to this problem, because, you know, this is the kind of thing where no matter what you do, you're going to upset somebody, right? Like, I mean, balance changes are almost always that way, but it's one of those things where, like, Genji players will be mad no matter what you do, so it's a difficult issue. I'd be curious to know if anybody's got anything to say about that one, about Genji's overall state, and if you agree that Genji is weak, any suggestions you have to make him, bring him back up a little bit, because I think he is weak, but I don't have any productive suggestions to make, so I'm curious if people agree, and if they have anything to say about it, really. And that's about all I got to say on the matter, very conveniently right as we end the game. Thank goodness I didn't have to fill space for like 10 minutes as we wait for the game to end. Tremendous. So, there you go. So, thank you very much for watching if you did. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to answer. If you haven't already, you can join our Discord and ask questions more directly and have a conversation about them, or just shitpost with us. I've started streaming on Twitch Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 8 p.m. EST till midnight EST. There's a link to the channel in the description. And if you managed to make it all the way through the video and somehow still enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more content of middling quality in the future, and I hope you found the video helpful.